Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. Last week I did a video about comic covers and how new comic covers ignore all of the old rules of how to create a comic cover and how to draw in an audience through your comic cover. Because, as someone pointed out brilliantly in my comments for that video, these new comic covers are meant to look like paperback novel covers, because that's the kind of audience that they want to draw in now. They want to draw in this paperback novel audience, which is quite specifically a more female audience as opposed to your traditional male comic book audience. And today I'm going to make the argument that this exact same thing is done within the pages of the comic itself and on the cover in a almost subliminal way through the use of colors, because the traditional color palette for comics is no longer used. There is a much more updated color palette used for comics, and this use of this color palette that they put in almost all comics today is the visual equivalent of the statement, "This comic is not for you." Because on social media you have all of these comic pros, and if you're even mildly negative about what they're putting out there, or even if you're mildly conservative in your views, they will straight up tell you, "Go away. I don't want you reading my stuff. You are not my audience. You need to go away from comics. We don't want you here anymore." And I would say that the color palette, again, is an almost subliminal visual statement of that exact thing. And not just, this comic isn't for you, but comics are not for you, period. Go away. And this statement is in no small part an ideological statement, because of course they are saying once again that you don't think like we think, therefore we don't want you here buying our product. So to begin with, I guess I should explain what I mean by this new color palette that they use. Well, the old color palette that they used for comics was saturated colors, and the new color palette that they use is desaturated colors. So your old color palette was bright, poppy, primary colors, and if you wanted to use deep colors, you would use a variation of that. You can put some deep primary colors in there as well, but they're primary colors, ones that stand out. But with your desaturated colors, you would have colors that are, as I would see them, bland and mud-like colors that all blend together. You might think of them as soft colors, or cool colors, or earth tones, or something like that. But I would just categorize them as being bland colors, mud-like colors that all blend together into one. So, desaturated colors, and that's what I mean by the current color palette that they use. So I'm going to go over a number of reasons why they use this new color palette and how each of those reasons means that they want a new audience, not the traditional audience for comics. And I'm going to do it hopefully in a ascending order. So I'll do what I see as the least important first and build up to the most important. So number one on these would be the big push for digital. There is certainly within Marvel and DC a push for digital sales, and not just digital sales along with your normal hard copy sales, but digital sales exclusively. Now, when I did that other video about covers, I was doing it off of a podcast from a Marvel panel, and they were talking about selling comics a lot in that panel, and something didn't really click for me. There was something that didn't sound right in every time they talked about selling comics, and I couldn't put my finger on it, and I didn't put my finger on it until after I had done my own video on this podcast. When they talked about selling comics, every time they talked about it, they were talking about selling comics digitally. And that's what it was that I couldn't put my finger on. They were talking about sales that were digital all the time, in every instance. Never once were they talking about physical copies being sold. And these people work for Marvel. And when you look at Marvel Comics now, if you go buy Marvel Comics and you run across somewhere within the Marvel comic that page that has a little sticker on it that gives you a code so that you can go and get the digital version of this book, well, that is them trying to draw you into digital comics because it's giving you something for free, and large companies never give you anything for free. The whole point of why they would give you this supposedly for free is because they want to draw you into digital because they want you to buy digital alone. Now this push isn't as big in DC as it is in Marvel, but because Marvel is owned by Disney, Disney does not want to be a publisher. They swore off publishing, especially comic publishing, a long time ago. They don't want that. They would like nothing better than to just be a digital comic producer. And that's the thing. When they are creating comics, they are thinking solely about producing comics that are going to be read digitally. Yes, they can be transferred onto a page and they can be put in normal comics, but they don't think about that and they don't want to concern themselves with that. And the problem with that is twofold. Number one is that when you are putting things in a digital platform, you have to realize that people are going to read these comics on a number of different devices, and therefore they have to look good on a number of different devices. And the way that you do that is to make your color palette desaturated, is to make everything almost blend together, because there's much less of a contrast when you have desaturated colors. So there's much less of a chance for there to be a jarring color contrast within the comic itself and when you're viewing it from one device to another. So that's the A reason for doing this within their comics. The B reason is because everything is done not just for digital, but created digitally as well. And something has been happening for a number of years now within a lot of different mediums, and comic books would be one of them. And it is the use of what they call the orange and teal effect. Now, the background that I'm giving you here is of two new imprints that are being put out by DC. One for graphic novels, one for YA novels. Both of them are meant to draw in a new audience, and since they're for young adults, you know what kind of audience they're trying to draw in. And if you look at the Mera one, the Mera Tidebreaker one, this is a perfect example not just of the use of the orange and teal effect, but the overuse of the orange and teal effect. So, briefly, what the orange and teal effect is something they discovered a long time ago when they were making movies. It's that when you shoot in orange and teal light, everything looks softer and you can evoke a lot more emotions under that kind of lighting. And the thing is that within nature, the orange and teal effect generally occurs at two specific times of day, one being sun up and the other being sundown. And so these old movie makers, if they wanted to evoke a lot of emotion, they would take their cameras and shoot their scene outside during sunup or sundown. Now, naturally, you can see why this would evoke a lot of emotion because, you know, sunup and sundown are emotional times. Not only is the sun coming up, but you're getting ready for your day at sunup. You know, you're raring to go. And at sundown, the day is over. You're getting ready to relax. Everything has been done. You can now kick back, and things are going to be much better for you for the rest of the day. So these are emotional times of day. And naturally, as human beings and a species that have grown up on this planet, we have an innate draw to those colors, that orange and teal kind of lighting that evokes a lot of emotion within us. But there is a problem with this today, and it is because so many types of entertainment are being produced digitally. And when they are being produced digitally, it is very easy to take the orange and teal effect and apply it to everything. And this is what is happening right now with movies that are coming out of Hollywood. The orange and teal effect is being plastered over top of almost every movie that you see for the entire movie. If your movie has any budget at all for post-production changing of colors, they're going to put in the orange and teal effect. And that's what's happening within your comics as well. Because they're being produced digitally, they're using the orange and teal effect. All I got to do is take all of their PDF file and push a couple of buttons and change the entire thing to have some kind of orange and teal effect. And again, this is to evoke emotion within you. But the problem is this. As with anything, if you take it and just plaster it everywhere, over everything, and this orange and teal effect is everywhere now, within almost every movie that you see, within almost every magazine that you pick up, within your comics that you pick up, almost every visual that you look at is going to be using this orange and teal effect if it has been generated digitally. And the thing is that, as the old Aesop fable goes, familiarity breeds contempt. Because this effect is everywhere now, people are getting so bored with it, and it is a boredom within the back of your mind. It is an instinctual boredom, because we pick up on this orange and teal effect instinctually, and so the boredom is instinctual. And that's why, for a lot of movies and for your comics right now, you pick them up and you look at these colors and go, I really don't like that. Why does everything have to look the same? But of course, for your comics, they're choosing this color palette and this effect to evoke emotion because they want an audience that is concentrating on emotion. And I'll get back to that point in a little bit. Now, number 2 on my list is the difference between comics and graphic novels. Now, traditionally, when you had a comic versus a graphic novel, you would use 2 different color palettes. Your comics would have that traditional poppy saturated color palette with your bright reds and blues and yellows and greens, and have some heavy colors in the background, depending on if you wanted to make it ominous or not, or gritty or not. You would still use these deep colors in some way. But with your graphic novels, what you were supposed to use for your colors for a graphic novel was desaturated colors, because these graphic novels were supposed to be for adults and your comics were supposed to be for children. That's the way normies looked at it, you know. Comics are for children, graphic novels are for adults. And so they had to make the graphic novels look much less cartoony, because your normal color palette for your comics is a cartoony color palette, and it works well for comics. But they wanted these graphic novels to appeal to a much more, as they say, sophisticated and adult audience. And so they wanted the graphic novels to look much more like the normal world and much less cartoony. And so desaturating the colors is what they used to look more realistic, and so draw in these sophisticated adults as opposed to your child-minded people who buy comic books. But then the bright people who produce comic books said to themselves, well, look, we're not actually writing for children. Why do people assume that we're writing for children? We are supposed to be writing for adults too, you know. Why don't people give us the same respect as graphic novels? And then they thought to themselves, well, we'll just take our comics and make them look like graphic novels. And that way we will draw in that more sophisticated adult audience as well. And that's what they did. And they took that desaturated color palette and transferred it over to the comics to make them look like graphic novels. And the whole point, again, here is that they didn't want their small, niche comic audience. No, they wanted this more sophisticated adult audience, and they wanted it for their comic books, not just for the graphic novels. Now, number 3 on this list would be the MCU and the DCEU. And the problem with the movie universes is that right now, if you look at comics, and I'm going to do an entire video about this at some time. Right now, if you look at comics, they are a copy of what you see in the movies. And the thing is about what you see in the movies, it has things like this orange and teal effect. Movies have been depending on this for a long time now. But not only that, but within the MCU itself, you have a post-production changing of colors so that everything has the same color palette. The VP of post-production for the Marvel movies came out and said in, I think it was 2012, said that, yes, we take all of our movies when they are done and we put them through a color filter. And we do that because the movies are so dependent on visual effects, and we use so many different companies for these visual effects. Well, we have to standardize how these visual effects work, and not just standardize them within the movie itself, but from movie to movie. So every Marvel movie is taken in post-production and run through color filters in order for them all to look the same. And that color filter is to desaturate the colors of the movie. And so since the movies are doing this, and it's a digital effect that they can do within the movies, and this digital effect is much easier to do on simple forms of media like comics, and the comics want to look like the movies, then what they do is they take that color effect and they apply it to the comics so that it looks like the movies. And again, the whole point is to try and get people who go and see the movies to buy comic books, because the people who produce comic books don't want to produce comics for the small niche audience of comic book buyers that are out there. No, they want the millions and millions of people who go see the movies to buy their product. And they think that when they make it look the same visually, they will draw in those massive hordes of people, those billion people who go see the movie. Which, if you're a comic buyer, know is a pipe dream, but that's what they're trying to do. And the last reason for putting in this desaturated color palette, I would say, is the most important reason for them to do it. Because it is a reason that is tied into the ideological push that is on within comics right now. So if you've listened to any number of my videos, you can clearly see that within Marvel and DC, but really quite specifically within Marvel, there is this push to make ideology the center of what your story is about. Not something that is added to your story and can enhance your story, but it is the central point of the entire story. My last video, I talked about this Captain Marvel book and went over an interview with the author. And she is ideologically driven. There's no bones about it. You can just see it straight out. She uses the word sexism and misogyny at least a half a dozen times when she's talking about the motivations for the characters of this book. She talks about introducing their slave characters to feminist ideology in order to free them from this sexism and misogyny that is everywhere in the world. So you can quite easily see that the central core of what she's doing with that book is ideologically driven. And this ideology is a quote-unquote progressive ideology, which would include your radical feminism, which I have talked about in a number of videos. And part of that radical feminism is that you get rid of male power and associate only with female power. And male power is characterized by things like aggression and authority and competition, where your female power is characterized by things like cooperation, empathy, sympathy, all of these kinds of things. And in their minds, in their ideological minds, there is a strict divide between the two. Aggression, in their minds, can never be a good thing, whereas empathy can never be a bad thing. That is opposed to your traditional way of looking at emotions, which is they have a good side and they have a bad side to them. Aggression can have a good side. Empathy can have a bad side. That's their traditional way of looking at it. But no, in their minds, the female emotions are always positive and the male emotions are always negative. And the way that they sell this in a subliminal way is their choice of their color palette. Because the psychology of color use has been known for a long time now. They know that the use of a bright red increases your heart rate and your respiration and increases your appetite, which is why they use a lot of reds in fast food advertising. They know that orange represents happiness and creativity and success. They know that yellow can have a warming effect, but the use of too much yellow can make you feel angry. They know that green is soothing and relaxing. It makes you feel safe and stable. They know that blue not only makes you feel relaxed, but suppresses your appetite. They know that purple stimulates creativity, but too much purple makes things feel gloomy and makes a person feel frustrated. And so the point is this. Desaturated colors are picked up by the human mind as non-threatening colors. Whereas your normal colors for your comic book, your poppy, bright reds and blues and greens and all those kinds of things, well, when used in the way that they were traditionally used, you have a lot of red. Red stimulates the idea of aggression and anger and conflict. That's why so many comic costumes incorporated a bright red into them traditionally. And you would have your dark blues that you would see in your Batman comics. That dark blue symbolized authority. That's why most police uniforms are dark blue, because for the human mind it's a symbol of authority. But all of those kinds of things, the idea of aggression and violence and authority, which naturally for older comic readers should be there because you're talking about superheroes and there should be conflict within your comic all over the place. That's what makes them fun. No, these people, they want to get rid of all of that male and they want to focus on the female. They want to focus on the soft tones. They want to focus on the non-threatening things. And so they use these non-threatening color palettes, which is your desaturated color palette. This is the kind of thing that they are doing in a subliminal way with their colors in the background. Because why would you take 4 pages of your comic book and put an impassioned gun control speech in the mouth of Batman to try to sell this idea to your audience when all you really need to do is use your desaturated color palette for all of the Batman comics? Because that is a non-verbal way of expressing on every page that you should be passive and cooperative, rather than the old traditional dark blues of your Batman that make you think about authority. And that's the key right there. They want to evoke emotion with the use of their color palette, because their, quote, progressive ideology is built on nothing but emotion. You don't want people confronted by colors that make them think about things like authority, because when you're confronted by something like that old color palette confronts you visually, it does do that. It makes you think. That confrontation to your eyes makes you think. Their ideology doesn't want you to think. It wants you to feel. And it wants you to solve your problems only through feeling. So quickly, let's go back over that list for a minute to see why they are using this color palette to get rid of you and to draw in a new audience. Well, number one, if you're a traditional comic buyer and you like physical copies of your books at least once in a while, well, they don't want you because they don't want to put these things onto a physical copy because that takes too much resources, that takes too much time. They want to sell digitally and digitally only. So they're making these comics for the digital medium, not for being printed on a page. They'll print them on a page now, but really it's just an afterthought. Number two, they don't want people who are traditional comic readers who believe in what they see as archaic notions of things like good guys and bad guys. No, they want a more sophisticated adult audience, like a graphic novel audience that looks at the world in gray tones. They don't want people who think about things in terms of things like right and wrong, good and bad, hero and villain. No, they want people to think about things in the sophisticated way of things are all relative. Everything is a nuance. That's what they want. And so traditional comic readers who like a good guy and a bad guy, who like to see and know who's in the right and who's in the wrong, well, they don't want you anymore. Number three is making your comics look like your movies. Because we all know in the back of our minds that comic sales are for a niche audience. And these giant companies don't want to sell to niche audiences anymore. They want to sell to the millions upon millions upon millions of people that go see comic book movies. And so they need to make the comics look like movies so that they can hopefully draw in that massive number of people. And number four, which I see as the most important, is that ideologically, they don't want that old male audience who are comic book readers. They want this new feminized audience, which are female or female-like guys who read these comic books, so that when they center their entire book, an entire story around this ideology, you're going to automatically get it. Because comics are a visual medium, so if you're attracted to it visually when they use these desaturated colors, there is much more of a chance that you're going to agree with these people ideologically. And it all boils down to the fact that they want to take their comic book and dumb it down. And part of that dumbing down is to dumb down the colors by making them desaturated, by making them non-threatening, by making them more female-friendly. They want to do this so that they don't evoke any kind of strong emotion and not any kind of thought within the people who will potentially buy this book. They want to make it so that they can take this and sell it to everybody across the world. But unfortunately for them, Their ideology blinds them to the fact that human beings have a nature, and part of that nature is to be tribal. That is to say, to set up boundaries between you and other people in order to make yourself feel secure. Because when you take something and you water it down to the point where it appeals to everyone, it erases any kinds of boundaries between people. And when you erase boundaries for people, that instinctual tribalism that's in the back of everybody's minds kicks in and says, this is a threat of some kind. You better be careful. And in doing so, in trying to make their product appeal to everyone, it appeals to no one. So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. Alright, I'll see you later. Bye.